Hi, I'm Will Corona Pilgrim, narrative advisor on Mato.
And hey, I'm David Giltonen, narrative designer of Mato Anomalies.
So for people who don't know what this game is, can you guys give us a little elevator pitch about what this game and its world are all about?
So Mato Anomalies is basically a JRPG, very much in the same vein as say a Persona. It's very like Persona-like the way it operates, and the way the combat is. And it's basically takes place in a futuristic Shanghai. Yeah, it has a little bit of card combat, card battler sort of mechanics in there as well. It has a dual protagonist. Really interesting storyline that'll really take you through some twists and turns, which I should know about. So without spoiling anything, that's pretty much all I can really say on it. As far as a general synopsis of it, but it is very much of a JRPG. If you like the Persona series, if you like those types of games, this will definitely be in your wheelhouse.
How did you and Will get involved in the project?
For myself, I was kind of following David. I think he had done a lot of the heavy legwork on bringing in the culture of the westernized side of things, because a lot of this is being done in China, and we have a mutual contact over there who we admire and adore, and he brought us into wanting to kind of make it a little broader of an audience. So they had a translation, they have a lot of story that they had built up with a lot of that development team, and just based on my Marvel Comics experience and my kind of broader storytelling acumen, they said, okay, we have a lot of story that we've kind of built. Can you help us a little bit with the voices? Because they wanted to make sure that it didn't start feeling static. And David did a ton of legwork there, and building even character names, right, David? I believe you did.
Yeah. In fact, I can certainly share that. Actually, there's a very particular character. She's an NPC who basically gives you some missions, especially early on in the game. And her original name was Lead Crane. But that's basically kind of to invoke the fact that she is someone who's not to be trifled with. A little bit of that poisonous kind of motif with lead, but that didn't quite translate too well for Western audiences. So one of the suggestions that we ended up going with was Donna Nightshade. So Nightshade, again, kind of evoking the poisonous motif. She has kind of flowery patterns on her dress as well. And also Donna being the female equivalent of kind of the mafia Don honorific. And then also placing into if someone wants to give her the utmost respect, they call her Lady Nightshade. And so she kind of she really kind of demands that respect. She runs the Tolosma hotel and bar. And that's basically meant to be kind of a middle ground for a lot of people who would normally be at war with each other to basically be at peace and not start any trouble. Think of I guess the hotel in the John Wick movies. It's kind of in that sense. So.
Or the Casablanca, and if you're going old school. So it's it's a nice
100%,
which is fun because the game is futuristic and old school. I don't think you had mentioned it in your description, David, but it is neo-futuristic, but it also calls back to 1930s Shanghai in its design aesthetics. So it's a really cool new blend, which I don't think these games tend to dive into very much. And I think that's what makes it very fresh and exciting, because you get someone who's Donna Nightshade, and you go, oh, that's kind of a cool name. But then you see her and you see this world and you go, I was not expecting this. And as you said, everyone calls her Lady Nightshade. It's very, very, tilting the hat to the Dawn. No one, the only one who calls her Donna, I think, is our main character. And even then, it's tenuous at best.
Yeah, because it's really Doe who only calls her Donna, because they kind of have that relationship together. But everyone else, for the most part anyway, just calls her Lady Nightshade or Nightshade or whatever.
It's funny. I got when I saw the trailer, I got kind of Blade Runner vibes, ground level, lots of the signage, neon.
It's very Blade Runner.
Yeah.
It's very Blade Runner, but like Will said, and it was great that you mentioned that, Will. That has that noir vibe to it as well. Especially since with Doe being a detective himself, and he's his whole gameplay is very much revolved around him investigating and trying to find the truth. Not so much in the combat end of things. That's where Graham comes in. But as far as the all the kind of detective gameplay and the motif and all that stuff, it's very much noir cyberpunk kind of mixture. Yeah
Totally.
Is it difficult when you're taking dialects and things from a different culture, different for Eastern audiences, and bringing it to the West and keeping it intact? Because the thing that I keep thinking about, Dave, when you were talking about it, was Sailor Moon. When it came to the States, they weren't called rice balls, right? They were called donuts, even though they clearly weren't donuts. What's the balancing act between that to keep that cultural significance, but also translate it well enough so Western audiences can relate to it and and feel connected to it?
I did. It was a balancing act, because it was not wanting to rip apart what's there, because what's there in the aesthetic and it being a Shanghai set game, you didn't want to say, okay, well, let's remove all these like Western audiences aren't going to get this. Let's just start tearing it out of the roots. You never.
That's a rice ball.
Yeah, rice ball. Forget that. No, you never want to act like your audience is not going to play along or want to be transported to that world. So it was a balancing act as far as different things. If I had a question, I had more trouble with syntax, because I think that was making sure if a character was speaking, there is actually animations to the journalistic approach of it. As you jump into the gameplay itself, you're talking with people, but the characters are kind of reacting and having a little bit of minutia in their speaking, and making sure when you're doing anything, if you're rewriting, like having to rewrite from scratch or having to make it translate properly, you don't want to have to go back and change all the animations. So I jokingly say it's been like this bizarre writing Sudoku, where you're like, you're making sure you're following these guidelines that are kind of like these milestones that have to be in place, and that includes the cultural references. So you make sure, because sometimes there's an image of said thing. As you said, if there's a rice ball, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, the donut. No,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
You don't want to railroad anything like that, or bring any concept of colonialism into things. You want it to be celebrating everything that's already there. And I think when I say bringing it to a Western audience, and David agrees, when you're bringing it to a Western audience, that just means making sure they're not lost, like making sure you're like, oh, okay, this is referencing something that I don't have enough of the backstory with. A lot of that had more to do when it came to the mythologies, when it came to like Eastern mythology. And I do that with, if you're bringing in Greek myth, any myth you bring into stories, it's okay to presume that people know the beats, like what happens in a story, but thinking that everyone knows the gods, the legend, the heroes, and the characters of those stories is a big jump. And that doesn't matter what myth you're adapting. It's just very important to make sure that let's give them a little bit of a breadcrumb so they understand why we're talking about that myth, not the myth itself. And I think I found a few trip ups in that, and that's why we worked with our translation team and the wonderful people there. We were just kind of finding that happy middle ground that I just wanted it to speak good, and then I wanted them to feel like their own as characters, as individual characters, which was that's kind of, once you get a few steps, you get the broad characters and story, and that translation, you get down to the minutia of characters themselves and wanting them to sound exciting. And like, if I read that line of dialogue, and I know David knows this, when you're voice acting, you have to feel like I can read that line and I know who's speaking, even if it doesn't have any character names to it. And I tried my best, and I think David did as well, to make sure that was celebrating what was there, but also that's where our flavor, I feel, came in and made those characters kind of stand apart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought up like the Greek mythology example, actually, because I mean, like, I think of like God of War, for example, and like, not like everyone is like super, knowledgeable on like all the gods and all the like stories like with that. But the way that, like, say, like with God of War presents those things, it is done in a very relatable sort of way by like, not like completely changing the characters or even like eliminating some of those stories, but just like rebranding them in a way like where it's still true to the context of like where they come from, and also presenting it in a way that, again, that people would like appreciate and be able to relate to, especially on like an emotional level. So that was like very important, certainly for us in the team, like in the narrative side of things, to make sure, at least with Mato Anomalies, to present like a lot of the emotion like behind like some of the story beats, and certainly with the characteristics. Certainly with like Butterfly, for example, because like she is very excitable. She very much likes to kind of like poke and prod and like kind of like poke fun, especially at Graham. She's very much like addicted to her TV shows and everything too. So we try to make it like there's no like kind of specific TV shows, but she's into certain types of TV shows. So like it's not taking those like specific references, but like still presenting them in a way that could be appreciated worldwide, really. Because there were certain things like in the translation that were very specific to like, say, like Chinese lore. And like a lot of that stuff, like I just kind of like made sure to like, if it's like important to like, say, the context of the story, then like keep it, but still it's just a presentation of that to make it digestible, I guess, like for both audiences. So.
Can you guys talk about how you take like a structure like dialogue and an exchange and then modify it? See, the core is still there, but it's more relatable for a Western audience.
I'll just kind of start off by saying that it's all about, like, especially for those conversation moments, to understand where the characters are coming from and to really get to know like who those characters are. I guess to compare it to like my voiceover work as well, it's very much kind of the same mindset. You have to kind of like put yourself in the mind of like the character that you're playing as or writing for in this case. It's not so much like putting on like a voice or just kind of like be like, oh, I'm just gonna like write Butterfly like she's my little sister kind of thing. It's like not quite, unless your little sister does happen to be very like bratty and TV obsessed or whatever. It's more of like just kind of understanding like what are the motivations of these characters, especially when you kind of get into the weeds of like what their past is like, and you will definitely get into that with Mato Anomalies. I bring up with Butterfly because her past is actually very, very interesting. Will could probably attest to this as well.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite characters, I think. And as David mentions, like setting up like kind of that little sister he jabs. I had a little sister, so it's like it wasn't too far of a stretch, but it was trying to. I think we joked about. We joked on some of our conversations about this, where I started listening. I was just out and about, and I heard this young girl was saying like, "Oh, yeah, who's asking you, guy?" And I heard that guy, and I was like, oh, that's funny, because she was talking to a girl at the time, and I thought that was hysterical. I was like, oh, that's kind of a funny little tweak, and that's just kind of places me in the SoCal area I am in. But at the same time, it's like, oh, that's kind of fun to maybe this can give her a bit of that flavor. Like I said, like it's that flavor I'm looking for. So when her character was already built as excitable and fast talking and already doing everything that can translate across any language, and then David built in this kind of pathos of, oh, she's a younger sister, a little needler. And I just kind of threw on that little cherry, and it's just like, oh, okay, now it feels like this is a character, this is a person who we either met or we're having fun enjoying meeting for the first time in a game and living and having a long, or getting annoyed by it because she's intentionally being annoying because she likes needling and doing all that.
She's kind of charmingly annoying.
I think
she's annoying to the characters around her, but not necessarily to the audience, which I feel like is very much of a line to straddle with characters like that. Like say with like Deadpool, for example. Deadpool is meant to be very annoying to everyone else in the Marvel universe, but he's meant to be very funny and very affable in a sense to the audience. So
absolutely, yeah.
I feel like a lot of Western audiences now accept a lot of the Japanese games at face value without even having any like translation or Westernization part of it. The Fire Emblem series is like almost pure Japanese in terms of a lot of what it works in the messaging and the writing and how the characters talk, and people are accepted. But what are the challenges specifically with a Chinese game? Because that's something you don't really see a lot of direct correlations one-to-one, especially in the US.
I think the challenges are the same as it would have been, like you joke about the rice balls and the donuts. Like it's like you just because they haven't seen it doesn't mean the audience will just like dismiss it. That's kind of where I was coming from, and that came to the cultural references, anything from food to minor bits of dialogue that you're wanting to be transported. If you're playing this game at all, you're wanting to be transported, and that's what's so wonderful about it, because it's in this neo-futuristic, nostalgic, and anachronistic place. It's already this escapism world. And that's what's so fun to dive into. So saying that there's this little, if it's a dialogue issue or are people not going to engage, I don't think it is as much of a challenge as the statement itself. Like, oh, it's Chinese instead of Japanese. Like people would have said that about Japanese games 20 years ago. But I think it's just, we've been acculturated to so many of them now. I think this could be at the forefront for Chinese games to do the same thing if they're so willing. And I think that's more structurally they choose not to for many varying reasons. As you've said, it's because it's so difficult, and it'll be hard to be the first one out. And that's why the team at Arrow is bringing on David and myself is a step in that direction to say, well, let's try to make it a little more Western, like just enough so that everyone can understand the game and be as excited about it for all the hard work we've put in. And I think that's a great sign. It's being knowing to put the people in the roles to get it to be digested to bigger audiences.
Exactly, yeah, and like that's a very fair point. Like still wanting to kind of transport people to that world because like it is a very much of a futuristic place, but still Shanghai to its core. That's where like the team is from, so like it makes sense that they would use like their own setting for the setting of the game, but like, yeah, still making it digestible. And like, certainly as far as like as far as what the challenges look like between Japanese and Chinese, will pretty much hit it on the head. I mean, the challenges are pretty much the same. It's just a different language, different culture entirely. So it's just a matter of how do you translate that to be more worldly. Obviously with Will and I, we're coming from more of like a Western viewpoint. I tried to make it so that there's almost kind of like a best of both worlds, where it's still kind of keeping to the core of like where this setting is and like where the context is with it. It's still going to feel like Shanghai, but it's going to be a digestible Shanghai for everyone to appreciate, whether you're from China or not, whether you're familiar with Chinese culture or not. It will still kind of transport you to that world and still to that setting with all the cool, like, kind of futuristic stuff and the noir stuff. It's still very much attributed to that, which I think is very important for a game like this to kind of keep that balance. And as far as like with like Japanese culture, I mean, yeah, like a lot of that was attributed through video games, especially through anime as well. I mean, I remember first watching like movies like Akira and Ninja Scroll and Ghost in the Shell, and like all that was like, oh, okay, this is all very different from like Western animation. And then that was kind of like a rabbit hole that like I went down like as like a young kid. And I feel like now we're almost like in the we're kind of like starting to be like on the edge of like that being kind of the same thing, but for Chinese media now too, because like there's like certainly a big rise of that. And it's really exciting to to be on the ground floor of that, if you will, with Mato Anomalies.
Now, David, in terms of voice acting, do you have to do, because the American language is very long, and a lot of the Eastern languages they say a lot of things in much shorter sentences. Do you have to do looping? Do you have to, like you said, you want to avoid them not changing animations drastically all the time? So how do you get around problems like that if the character's mouth is moving way longer than it should, or very shorter than it should, and the American line is much longer than the original animated line?
I mean, I know for me, when approaching the lines, I try to kind of stick with more or less as far as like what the same as far as like the same number of like syllables, to try to keep as close to it as possible. If I need to go considerably shorter or considerably longer, I would usually like refer back to the narrative team over in Shanghai. Just kind of like I had like one particular contact who I would go to. It was basically like the narrative lead over there, and he was very good as far as giving like context to certain lines that didn't quite make sense to my Western brain. And allowing me to to have that proper context, really, to have like a line that would make sense with the line that I want to like inject in there, or like kind of like the vibe of it. If it was going to be something different as far as what the machine translated English looked like, because that's usually what I worked with, was whatever was the machine translated English would kind of like spew up and be like, okay, make sense of this. It's like, all right, cool. And then just work with that. But like it started off with that, and then as I'm kind of doing more and more of these lines and getting to know these characters more, it was almost like just like how Will said, like it's like having like a family. I almost felt like another character coming in, getting to know all these different personalities and what their motivations are, and that helped me to basically be like a better writer, better narrative designer, I guess in this case, for helping bring these characters to light, especially for like a more worldwide audience. So.
No, I think it's great. I mean, we've come so far from the days of Resident Evil when voice actors were given $200 and 500 lines out of order with zero context, which is why the delivery is all over the place. It's not like we're bad voice actors.
It's all
just
wild
look at
lines.
these lines stand alone. They're like, I don't know. They just, what is the context? We don't know. Just read the line. That's why the voice acting is hilariously bad, because they didn't know what was going on. But now we've gotten to the
butterfly
point,
sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're at the point where companies are working with narrative Westerners like yourself to translate and give context to make it sound smooth and natural and more accepting and just more fluidity, I guess, have more fluidity to their exchange, so it's not awkward. But it sounds like you guys are killing it on that end. So when does this game come out, and what platforms will be out at launch?
Yeah, well, it's March 10th. It's up on Steam right now. I know you can pre-order it there. I believe anyway. I believe you can pre-order it there, or at least you can wish list it there, and you'll get notified at least for when it's ready to pre-order or to buy. I'm not sure if it's like up for pre-order on other platforms, but it will be coming to basically the PlayStation platforms, Xbox platforms, and also Nintendo Switch. So.